It was a quiet evening, the kind where the city lights flickered softly against the night sky, and the world outside seemed to slow down. In a grand, luxurious apartment high above the streets, the billionaire sat alone in his study, surrounded by walls of glass that showed the sparkling skyline. Despite all his wealth, the gold, the art, and the lavish furniture around him, he felt a strange emptiness, a hollow silence that even the finest things in the world could not fill. He had spent years building his empire, acquiring riches beyond imagination, yet something inside him felt incomplete, as if a small, invisible part of his life had been left untouched. The sound of a knock on his door broke the quiet. At first, he thought it was a delivery or a visitor he wasn't expecting, but when he checked the time, it was unusually late for guests. He frowned slightly and wondered who could possibly be there at this hour. With curiosity, and a hint of irritation, he walked toward the door, the soft click of his expensive shoes echoing in the hallway. He opened the door slowly, expecting to see a familiar face or perhaps someone seeking help for a trivial matter. Instead, what he saw made him stop in his tracks. On the doorstep stood a little girl, no older than 7 or 8, with tears streaking down her dirty cheeks. Her clothes were worn and tattered, her tiny hands clenched as if she were trying to hold on to something invisible. Her eyes, wide and filled with sorrow, looked straight at him, and in that moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. He had seen sadness before, read stories about it, and even witnessed it in passing, but nothing compared to the raw, unfiltered pain reflected in her gaze. There was no one to guide her, no one to protect her, just the quiet desperation of a child standing alone at his door. He wanted to speak, to ask why she was there, but words seemed too weak for the moment. It was strange how someone so small could make such a large impact on him. His mind raced with questions. Why was she crying? What could have happened to bring her to this point? He noticed the tremble in her shoulders, the way her lips quivered even before she spoke, and felt an unexpected ache in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Finally, the little girl took a hesitant step forward and whispered something that made him lean closer, straining to hear her fragile voice. It was a simple sentence, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 sorrows, a message so innocent yet so heart-wrenching that it pierced the walls he had built around his emotions. Her words were not loud or dramatic, but there was a raw honesty in them that made the billionaire feel an unfamiliar sting of guilt and empathy at the same time. For a moment, he felt powerless, unable to offer answers, unsure of what to do next. Despite the wealth and security he had created around himself, he suddenly realized how fragile life could be, how easily it could crumble for those who had nothing. He glanced down at her small shoes, worn thin at the soles, the way her hands fidgeted nervously. The contrast between his world, safe, controlled, and opulent, and hers, uncertain, vulnerable, and fragile, was stark. He had heard about struggles, read news stories, and seen documentaries about children in need, but none of it had ever felt as real as the moment she stood before him. Time seemed to slow. He felt an unfamiliar tension, the kind that made a person acutely aware of their own privilege. He had all the money he could ever need, yet here was a child who probably didn't even have enough to eat tonight, looking at him with hope, fear, and desperation all mixed together. He wondered what had led her here. Was it hunger, danger, or a loss too painful for a child to bear alone? Each possibility that crossed his mind made his heart tighten further. Something inside him shifted at that moment. The billionaire, who had always relied on contracts, deals, and numbers, realized that this situation couldn't be solved by money alone, at least not yet. It required something far more human: compassion, attention, and understanding. He knelt slightly to be at her level, careful not to startle her, and tried to meet her gaze with warmth. He knew that even a small gesture could make a difference in how safe she felt, but he also knew that the first step was to listen, really listen, to what she had to say. And so, standing there in the quiet of his lavish apartment, the billionaire experienced a moment that would change everything. The unexpected knock at his door had brought not just a stranger, but a child whose tears carried a story so powerful it could break the heart of even the richest man in the world. In that instant, he understood that wealth meant nothing without the ability to care, to act, and to bring hope where there was none. The little girl stood quietly on the billionaire's doorstep, her small frame trembling as if the chill of the night had seeped into her very bones. The room around her, with its shining floors and warm lights, must have seemed like a different world compared to the streets she had wandered through. She hugged herself tightly, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The billionaire, usually confident and in control in every situation, felt something unfamiliar, a mix of curiosity, concern, and an aching vulnerability he couldn't quite explain. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft, barely more than a whisper, but it carried a weight that immediately captured his full attention. "Sir," she said, her lips quivering, I have nowhere to go." Her words were simple, but they struck him like a physical blow. He had heard people talk about hardship and struggle, had read articles and statistics about children in need, but nothing had ever affected him like this. There she was, standing right in front of him, a real, living person, her words spilling out raw and unfiltered. He could see the fear in her eyes, the exhaustion in her posture, and the desperation in the small, trembling hands that held themselves tightly together. He knelt slightly to meet her gaze, careful not to appear intimidating, and asked softly, "Where do you live? Are you hurt? What happened?" The girl's eyes darted nervously to the edges of the grand apartment, as if she wasn't sure whether this world was safe or whether it would swallow her whole. Then, in a voice that broke a little more with every word, she began to tell her story. She spoke of a home that no longer existed, of parents she hadn't seen in days, and of nights spent alone in dark alleyways, too scared to sleep. Her words painted vivid pictures in the billionaire's mind, empty streets, cold winds, and the kind of fear that no child should ever feel. As she spoke, the billionaire felt a knot tighten in his chest. He realized that his life of wealth, comfort, and control had never prepared him for a moment like this. No contract, no bank account, no success in the business world could have taught him what it meant to face such raw human pain. Her story was not exaggerated or designed to manipulate, it was simple, truthful, and utterly heartbreaking. There was something about the way she spoke, honest, innocent, and painfully human, that made him realize how fragile life really was. He noticed the way she paused between sentences, taking shaky breaths, fighting tears that threatened to fall again. He wanted to do something, anything, to take away her pain, yet he knew that words alone were not enough. What she needed was safety, warmth, and someone who could show her that she was not alone. "Why are you here?" he asked gently, careful not to frighten her. "Why did you come to me?" Her lips trembled, and after a long pause, she whispered, I thought maybe someone could help me. I didn't know where else to go." The billionaire's heart tightened. Here was a child, small and vulnerable, putting her trust in a complete stranger. Her courage, despite the tears and fear, left him speechless. He realized that sometimes, it only takes one person to change another's life, and somehow, in her eyes, he understood that he was now that person. He reached out slowly, offering a hand, not to command, but to comfort, and she hesitated for a moment before taking it. The touch was small, but the connection was immense. It was a bridge between two very different worlds, his of luxury and security, hers of uncertainty and fear. In that instant, he made a silent promise to himself. He would do everything in his power to help her, to ensure that the tears she shed tonight would be replaced with hope. The girl's first words, simple and heartbreaking, had broken through the billionaire's walls of wealth and routine. He had been accustomed to controlling outcomes in his business, calculating risks, and negotiating deals. But here, there was no plan, no strategy, only a child who needed compassion, understanding, and love. And for the first time in years, he felt truly human, deeply connected, and painfully aware of the power of listening, of being present, and of caring. That night, as she finished speaking, he realized that life had brought him to this unexpected moment for a reason. Her words, innocent yet devastating, had opened a door inside him, one that he hadn't known was closed. It was a door that led to empathy, action, and change, not just for her, but for himself as well. And in that quiet, fragile space between a billionaire and a little girl, the first seeds of hope began to grow. After hearing the little girl's first words, the billionaire led her gently into his living room. He wanted to make her feel safe, wanted to show her that she was no longer alone, at least for now. The warm glow of the chandelier, the soft cushions of the sofa, and the rich scent of polished wood must have seemed like a different world to her, a place she had never imagined she could belong. She hesitated at first, her small hands gripping the edge of her torn coat, unsure if she could trust someone so powerful, so different from anyone she had ever known. Once she sat down, she began to tell her story more openly. She spoke of her small, cramped apartment that had recently been taken away, of her parents struggling with illness, and of nights spent wandering the streets, looking for food or shelter. Each sentence was like a brushstroke painting the harsh reality of her life. The billionaire listened, leaning forward, his eyes fixed on her every word, feeling the weight of her experiences settle heavily on his chest. She told him about the cold mornings when there was no breakfast, the afternoons when she had nowhere to play, and the lonely evenings filled with fear and uncertainty. She described the cruel looks from strangers and the nights she spent huddled under blankets, trying to imagine a world where she could feel safe. With every word, he felt a growing sense of urgency. This was a life full of struggle, a life that no child should ever endure. Her story was not just about hardship, it was about resilience. Despite everything, she spoke of her small dreams, dreams of going to school, of having friends, of feeling the warmth of a home. She mentioned a tiny garden she had once seen, imagining herself tending to flowers and vegetables, wishing she could plant something that would grow just for her. Even in the midst of sorrow, her imagination held a spark of hope, and it was that spark that touched the billionaire deeply. He noticed the way she fidgeted with her fingers, the way her gaze wandered to the windows, as if she could see another life beyond them. Her voice carried a mix of innocence and determination, showing a child who had already faced more than anyone should, yet still held on to dreams, however small. Each detail she shared made him realize the stark contrast between their worlds. He had never worried about a meal, a bed, or a roof over his head, yet here was someone so young, already burdened with fears he could not imagine. The billionaire felt an unexpected emotion rising inside him, a mixture of sadness, guilt, and admiration. Sadness for the life she had been forced to endure, guilt for his own indifference to suffering he had never directly faced, and admiration for the strength she carried despite everything. It was a humbling moment, one that made him question how he had lived so long in comfort without seeing the struggles of those less fortunate. As she spoke, he realized that this encounter was more than just helping a single child, it was a wake-up call. Her life, her story, and even her courage to speak to him in this way were lessons he could not ignore. He began to think about the ways he could actually make a difference, not just with money, but with time, care, and attention. He wanted to offer her more than temporary relief, he wanted to help her feel truly safe, valued, and hopeful. For the first time, he understood the importance of truly listening, of letting someone's story touch you, and of allowing yourself to feel empathy without judgment. Her words had a power that he could not deny, a quiet strength that demanded action. She wasn't asking for fame, riches, or rewards, she was asking for safety, understanding, and compassion, and it was a plea that no heart, however wealthy or powerful, could ignore. By the time she finished sharing her story, the billionaire felt a shift within himself. The emptiness he had carried for years seemed to lessen, replaced by a desire to act, to help, and to be someone who could change lives for the better. He realized that life was not just about what one owned, but about the impact one could make. And as he looked at the little girl, he promised himself silently that her story would not end here, that he would do everything he could to help her dream of a safe, happy, and hopeful future. After listening to the little girl's story, the billionaire sat quietly in his study, staring out of the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sparkling city below. The lights twinkled like tiny stars, but tonight, they seemed hollow to him. For the first time in years, the sound of wealth, power, and success felt meaningless. He had built a life surrounded by luxury, silken curtains, polished marble floors, expensive art, but none of it could fill the emptiness he felt now. Her words echoed in his mind, each one a gentle, piercing reminder that there was a world outside his golden walls, a world he had barely noticed, a world full of real pain. He leaned back in his chair, clasping his hands together, and thought about the stark contrast between their lives. She, small and fragile, had faced hardships he could not imagine. He, powerful and rich, had avoided any struggle beyond business challenges. The truth was undeniable. All his money could not buy her safety, her happiness, or her trust, but he could offer something far more valuable, his attention, care, and action. Memories of his own childhood surfaced, memories he had long pushed aside. He remembered feeling small, powerless, and overlooked in moments that mattered. Although he had been born into privilege, he had also known loneliness, and for a brief second, he recognized the echo of those feelings in the little girl's eyes. He wondered how many other children in the world were waiting outside doors like hers, hoping for someone to listen, to care, to act. The thought unsettled him deeply, and yet, it fueled a strange determination inside him. He realized that his life had been focused on achieving, acquiring, and controlling, but never on truly connecting. Deals, contracts, and investments had dominated his days, while people, the very heart of the world, remained peripheral, abstract, and distant. Tonight was different. Tonight, a single child had shattered the walls he had built around his heart, and for the first time, he understood that wealth was not the measure of life, compassion was. He closed his eyes for a moment and imagined her alone on the streets, cold and scared, without anyone to turn to. He imagined her little voice trembling, calling out for help, and he felt a pang of regret. How many times had he walked past someone in need without noticing? How many opportunities to make a difference had he ignored in pursuit of more wealth, more power, more prestige? The realization hit him hard. He could no longer remain indifferent. He had the means, the ability, and now, the responsibility to act. The billionaire leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees, thinking about what he could do immediately, and what would truly matter in the long run. He didn't want to simply give her money or temporary comfort. He wanted to ensure she would be safe, nurtured, and given the chance to grow without fear. He wanted to help her dream again, to feel hope in a world that had so far been cruel to her. He realized that the solution wasn't in wealth alone, but in human connection, the willingness to listen, to care, and to be present. He also thought about himself, about how he had lived so long in isolation despite being surrounded by people. His empire had grown, but his heart had shrunk. Success had been measured in numbers, not in impact. Yet, tonight, the scales had shifted. A small, trembling voice had shown him the value of presence, empathy, and action. He understood that true fulfillment came not from what he owned, but from what he gave, and from the lives he could touch for the better. Slowly, a plan began to form in his mind. It was not just about helping this one girl. It was about creating a ripple effect, reaching beyond his walls to make a meaningful difference. But first, he would start here, with her. He would ensure she felt safe tonight, and then tomorrow, he would find ways to help her build a future, a life that was free from fear and full of hope. He looked back at the little girl, still quietly sitting nearby, her eyes filled with trust, and felt a warmth he had not experienced in years. For the first time, he felt the true weight and beauty of responsibility, the kind that could transform both the giver and the receiver. He knew that tonight was the beginning, not just of her new journey, but of his own awakening. The billionaire had opened his door expecting nothing, but in doing so, he had opened his heart, and in that opening, something extraordinary had begun to unfold. The billionaire looked at the little girl sitting quietly across from him, her eyes still glistening with tears, and he knew he could no longer wait. The moment for reflection had passed, and it was time to act. For so long, he had relied on money to solve problems, but he understood now that this was different. She didn't need gifts or gold, she needed someone to care, someone to listen, someone to be there. And he decided that someone would be him. He leaned forward slightly and spoke in a soft, gentle voice, "You don't have to be alone tonight. You're safe here with me." Her eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and cautious hope reflecting in them. She didn't immediately move closer, as if unsure whether she could trust such kindness from a stranger, but she didn't run away either. The billionaire smiled gently, trying to ease the fear in her heart. "I want to help you," he continued. "We'll figure everything out together. You deserve to feel safe and cared for, and I can make sure that happens." For the first time that night, a small, genuine smile broke through her tears. She nodded slowly, almost hesitant, but it was a nod full of trust, a trust that had been so rare in her young life. The billionaire felt an unexpected warmth spread through him. Helping her wasn't just an act of charity, it was a bridge connecting two very different worlds. He realized that the tiniest gesture, a listening ear, a helping hand, could mean more than anything he had ever owned. He guided her to a cozy chair near the fireplace, offering her a blanket to wrap around herself. She accepted it shyly, and he noticed the way her small hands clutched it tightly, as if holding on to safety itself. Then, he brought her a warm cup of milk, careful not to startle her, and watched as she took it with tentative gratitude. Each small act of care seemed to bring her further out of her shell, and the billionaire felt a quiet satisfaction he had never experienced in any boardroom or business deal. Once she seemed a little more comfortable, he began asking gentle questions about her dreams. "What do you like to do?" he asked. "Do you have any favorite things? Anything you've always wished for?" She looked down at her hands for a moment, thinking, then whispered, I like to draw. I like to imagine gardens and houses and people happy. I like to think about a world where no one is alone." The billionaire's heart tightened. Even in the midst of her struggles, she had retained hope and imagination. He realized that her spirit had not been broken, only tested, and that gave him more determination than ever to help her. He promised himself, silently, that he would protect that hope, nurture it, and help it grow. He knew that helping her tonight was only the beginning. He needed to make a plan, not just for immediate comfort, but for her future. He considered everything she had told him, the nights spent alone, the fear of hunger, the lack of a stable home, the absence of care. Money alone could provide food and shelter, but what she needed more was security, education, and someone who could show her the meaning of trust. And he had the means, resources, and now the motivation to do it. He also realized that offering help required patience. She had been let down before, had experienced disappointment and mistrust. He could not force her to accept everything at once, he had to let her take small steps, to feel safe at her own pace. He was determined to be consistent, to show her that this time, things would be different. Hours passed as they sat together, talking quietly, sharing small smiles, and slowly building a connection. The billionaire listened, asked questions, and offered gentle encouragement, and the little girl began to relax. She laughed softly at a joke he made, a sound so rare and precious that it filled the room with warmth. In that moment, he realized that helping her wasn't just about giving, it was about presence, attention, and love. By the time the night grew deeper and the city lights outside flickered softly, the billionaire had made a decision. He would not only help her tonight but commit to changing her life. He had seen enough suffering, felt enough pain, and now understood that true wealth was measured in the lives you touched. He had opened his door expecting nothing, but by offering help, he had opened a new chapter, for her, and for himself. And as the little girl finally rested, still clutching the blanket he had given her, he watched her with a sense of quiet determination. He would not fail her. He would give her safety, care, and hope, and in doing so, he would discover a side of himself he had long forgotten, the power of compassion, love, and truly human connection. The next morning, the little girl woke up to the soft warmth of sunlight streaming through the tall windows. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel the cold streets pressing against her tiny body or the fear of being alone. The billionaire was already awake, quietly preparing breakfast, and when she came out, he smiled gently, as if greeting an old friend. The familiarity of the gesture made her pause. She was still cautious, still unsure if this was real, if someone so rich and powerful could truly care. He didn't rush her. He didn't ask her to explain everything at once or to reveal all her fears. Instead, he simply offered a warm plate of food and a calm presence. "Take your time," he said softly. "You're safe here." Those words, though simple, carried more weight than any grand promise could. They were the first real reassurance she had received in years. Over the next few days, the billionaire focused not on what he could buy for her, but on how he could build her trust. He listened, truly listened, when she spoke about her dreams, fears, and memories. He never interrupted, never judged, and never pressured her to act or speak beyond her comfort. At first, she remained quiet, answering in small sentences or shy gestures, but gradually, her walls began to crumble. He noticed small signs of change, the way she started to eat without hesitation, the way her laughter returned in soft, fleeting bursts, and the way her eyes sparkled with curiosity rather than fear. Each of these moments was a victory, a silent acknowledgement that trust was forming between them. The billionaire understood that this was not something money could buy. It was something far rarer, far more delicate, earned through patience, consistency, and genuine care. He also began sharing small pieces of his own life, not his wealth, but stories of his childhood, moments when he had felt lonely or scared, times he had made mistakes. By opening up, he showed her that vulnerability was not weakness, and that even powerful people could experience fear and uncertainty. She listened intently, her eyes wide, sensing the sincerity in his words. Slowly, she began to see him not just as a stranger, but as someone who could be trusted, someone who could protect her without asking for anything in return. They spent hours together, sometimes quietly, sometimes talking, sometimes just sharing a space without words. He encouraged her to draw, to tell stories, to imagine a world beyond her struggles. And she began to respond, creating small sketches of gardens, houses, and smiling faces. Each drawing was a window into her imagination, a fragile yet brilliant reflection of hope. The billionaire admired her creativity, encouraging her gently and celebrating even the smallest achievements. He understood that building trust meant nurturing her spirit as well as her safety. There were setbacks, of course. She would sometimes recoil at sudden movements, flinch at raised voices, or retreat into silence. But he never scolded or forced her, he simply waited patiently, letting her take the time she needed. And each time she returned, slowly but surely, he felt their bond deepen. She began to speak more freely, to ask questions, to express her wishes, and even to share small worries that had haunted her for weeks. Each word, each smile, each tentative step forward was a triumph, a sign that trust was growing stronger. The billionaire realized that building trust was not a single act, it was a process, a daily choice to show care, consistency, and patience. It was about being present, offering comfort, and proving through action that he was dependable. He began to see her not just as a child in need, but as a young human being with immense resilience, creativity, and courage. And in seeing her strength, he felt himself change too, his heart softening, his perspective shifting, and his life gaining a new purpose. By the end of the week, the little girl had transformed from a hesitant, fearful child into someone who could smile openly, ask questions, and even joke softly. The billionaire watched her one afternoon as she carefully arranged her drawings on a table, her concentration intense but relaxed, and he felt a quiet sense of triumph. Not for the control he had, not for the wealth he possessed, but for the trust he had helped to nurture, for the bridge he had built between their two worlds. In that moment, he knew this was only the beginning. Trust was fragile, but once earned, it could open doors that no money or power ever could. And with her trust, he now held the opportunity to guide, protect, and inspire her in ways that could truly change her life forever. Days turned into weeks, and slowly but surely, the little girl's life began to change. The billionaire had kept his promise, not only offering her immediate safety but also beginning to build a future she had only dreamed of. She now had a warm bed to sleep in, regular meals to eat, and clothes that fit her small frame comfortably. But more importantly, she had someone who cared, someone who listened, and someone who believed in her. And for the first time in years, she felt the gentle weight of hope settle in her heart. The billionaire didn't just provide for her needs, he guided her, encouraging her to attend school and explore the world she had only imagined. He found a small, private school where she could catch up on lessons she had missed, and he accompanied her on the first day, holding her hand as they walked through the gates. At first, she was shy and hesitant, glancing nervously at other children and teachers. But he whispered softly, "You are safe. You belong here," and the words seemed to give her courage. She took a deep breath, and together, they stepped inside. Each day brought new experiences. She learned to read fluently, discovered the joy of drawing and storytelling, and slowly opened up to the possibility of friendship. For the billionaire, watching her grow and thrive was a revelation. He had spent his life chasing success, wealth, and recognition, but none of it had given him the joy he now felt in seeing her smile, her eyes lighting up with wonder at small discoveries. Every laugh she shared, every story she told, felt like a gift he could never have imagined receiving. He also taught her important life lessons, not in lectures or rules, but through actions and gentle guidance. He showed her the importance of kindness, patience, and empathy. He encouraged her to help others in small ways, to notice the struggles of people around her, and to use her imagination and creativity to make a positive impact. Through these lessons, she began to understand that life was not just about surviving, but about making a difference, no matter how small. The transformation was not only in her life, it was in his as well. He had spent decades living in a world of contracts and negotiations, yet he realized that true value came from emotional connections, compassion, and human presence. The little girl had opened a door inside him, one he hadn't even known was closed. He discovered patience he never needed in business, joy in small victories, and fulfillment in nurturing a life beyond himself. He had not only given her a new beginning but had received something in return that money could never buy, a renewed sense of purpose and humanity. One evening, as they sat together in the garden he had arranged for her, she pointed to the flowers she had helped plant. "Look," she said softly, "these are ours. They grow because we care for them." The billionaire smiled, realizing that she was speaking not just about flowers, but about life itself. Their bond had nurtured growth, trust, and resilience, and her words reminded him of the delicate balance between care and attention, patience and love. Her world, once filled with fear and uncertainty, was now bright with possibility. She laughed freely, explored boldly, and dreamed without hesitation. She began to make friends at school, sharing her stories and drawings with them, slowly building the connections she had never had before. And every time she achieved something new, however small, the billionaire celebrated with her, sharing in her victories as if they were his own. The billionaire realized that the changes were not just in circumstances, but in the little girl herself. She had grown confident, resilient, and hopeful. She had learned that life could be kind, that there were people who could be trusted, and that dreams, no matter how distant they seemed, were worth pursuing. And he understood, in that quiet moment, that this was the true measure of success, the ability to transform a life, to bring hope, and to create change that lasts. By the time weeks had passed, it was clear that neither of them would ever be the same. She had found safety, guidance, and a chance at happiness. He had discovered compassion, purpose, and the extraordinary power of human connection. Together, they had built a life that neither wealth nor loneliness could have given alone, and in that transformation, both their hearts had been forever changed. The little girl had grown in ways that surprised even the billionaire. She no longer clutched her blanket for comfort or glanced nervously at shadows. Her laughter was bright and free, her imagination boundless, and her eyes sparkled with hope and curiosity. Every morning, she would run to the window to watch the city wake, pointing out rooftops, streetlights, and tiny gardens she imagined existed far below. The billionaire often watched her from a distance, a quiet smile tugging at his lips, feeling a warmth he had not known in years. But tonight felt different. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the apartment, he realized the story they had shared together was more than just about survival or safety. It was about transformation, about the subtle, invisible changes that happen when trust, care, and compassion touch a heart. He walked quietly to the little girl, who was sitting on the floor, arranging her drawings in neat rows. Each page depicted her world: gardens, houses, friends, and laughter. Her imagination had grown as vividly as her confidence, and he felt a surge of pride, not the kind tied to wealth or success, but something deeper, purer, and infinitely more satisfying. "Do you know what this means?" he asked gently, kneeling beside her. She looked up, her eyes wide and curious. "It means that you're brave. You've come so far, even though the world hasn't always been kind. And it means that hope is real, that kindness can change everything." The little girl blinked, processing his words, and for the first time, she smiled without hesitation. It was a smile that carried a lifetime of struggle and resilience, a smile that said, "I made it, and I am not alone anymore." In that instant, the billionaire understood something profound. It wasn't just her life that had changed. His life, too, had shifted. He had discovered a joy beyond wealth, a purpose beyond achievement, and a fulfillment that no deal or contract could ever provide. He thought back to the moment she first appeared at his door, small, trembling, and weeping. How fragile she had seemed, how heavy the world had been on her tiny shoulders. And now, to see her laughing, drawing, and imagining a future she once believed impossible, it was more than heartwarming. It was transformative. He realized that the act of opening his door had opened something far greater inside him, a space for love, empathy, and human connection that he had long neglected. They spent the evening together, sharing stories and laughter. He listened as she recounted her day at school, describing the friends she had made and the games they had played. He watched as she explained a new drawing she had created, full of flowers and sunlight, and felt a quiet awe at her resilience and creativity. And in each moment, he knew that this was the kind of richness that mattered, the richness of hearts touched, lives changed, and hope restored. The billionaire also reflected on what this journey had taught him. He understood that wealth without compassion is empty, that power without empathy is meaningless, and that even the smallest act of kindness can create ripples far beyond what one can imagine. He had given her safety and care, yes, but she had given him something priceless in return, the chance to truly connect, to nurture, and to be part of a story far bigger than himself. As night fell, he tucked her into bed, just as he had countless nights before now, and whispered softly, "You are never alone. You are safe. You are loved." She closed her eyes, a gentle smile on her face, and for the first time, he felt completely at peace. That evening, standing alone by the window and looking out at the city below, the billionaire understood that life had a way of teaching lessons in the most unexpected ways. A knock on his door, a little girl in need, and a few honest words had changed not only her life, but his own. He realized that true wealth is measured not by money or possessions, but by the lives you touch, the love you give, and the hope you inspire. And in the quiet of that night, with the city glowing softly around them, he felt a deep, enduring joy. They had both found something rare and beautiful: trust, connection, and the knowledge that even in a vast, complicated world, one act of kindness could make all the difference. The little girl slept peacefully, dreaming of gardens and laughter, while the billionaire smiled, knowing that her heart, and his own, had been forever transformed.